Okay, so our last tutorial was in Adobe Illustrator, and I can tell because AI is right there. My file name ends with AI. So I want to make sure that I'm in the right program, but I'm going to finish this thing off in Adobe Photoshop. The reason is Adobe Photoshop just does better color sometimes. Now before I do, I'm noticing that that eyeball went over the top of his nostril. So if I take that and use Object, Arrange, bring to the front, there it is. Now it's all straightened out. So I can now save this. You know, a couple tune-up things I might do is bump up the size of these lines. Okay, there's a few other things. You know, I could do a lot better job on this. But right now I want to move on and get the color done so you guys can learn how to do this. So I'm going to move on. So save this thing. I've already done that. And now I'm going to close this and I'm going to go open it in Photoshop. Photoshop works completely different. Illustrator is vector. It's shapes and points and colors. Photoshop is like a mosaic. So I'm going to open that document. Gosh, where did I put that thing at? It's somewhere in here. It's in my serial project folder. There it is. Monkey mascot. Now it's going to ask me a question. And the question is like, how do you want to do the bounding box on this? What's the size of the design? You may recall I made this, I think, 4 by 5 or something like that. And I had some space on the edge. So this is the bounding box is just the edge of the character. So if I try media box, now it's the full-size piece, which I can crop later if I want to. But let's open this thing up, double-click the hand to zoom out. Now, we've got some color in here. You can see my background is checkerboard because it's transparent. I'm going to check my layers panel. Layers, very important. This layer here is my line layer. So I'm going to name it line. And the reason I want to call it line is because it contains my line work. Semi-genius. I'm going to add 2 more layers, making sure to put my line layer on top. Put your line layer on top. Now these other 2 layers, this one here is going to be my color layer. Sometimes I just abbreviate COL. It's not an essay. And I'm going to call this one matte. Okay, and matte is like a color I'm going to lay down underneath of everything just to give myself something easier to look at than that darn checkerboard. Now I'm making this very desaturated. And my main purpose here is to see what's white and what's not filled in. So let's fill that in with the bucket tool. Bam. So you can see there that I've got some areas that are white and some areas that are not filled in. Let's go to my color layer. Before I do, I need to like color that white area in, but I'm going to do it on a separate layer. You may think back to a drawing you've done, and when as soon as you hit colors on it, you started messing up your line work. We are going to color our line work and our colors on separate layers. So let's change the line work so that this layer is multiply. And as you can see now, the areas that were white are now transparent. So normal, that white's still there, but multiply, it does this. And the reason we want to do that is because we're going to put all of our color on this layer here. Now, let's try some stuff out. I'm going to fill in this eyeball with white. I know it was already white, but I had to ruin it, didn't I? Let's click that there. And you see immediately that like it fills in everything. And that means that there's a leak in my shapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a separate layer here. And that layer is going to be called gap fill or something. I don't know. The reason it's called gap fill is because I'm going to zoom in on stuff and I'm going to start looking around for places that I need to close the gaps. Starting off with the eyeball. And I'm going to draw this with the red so I can see it. And in this case I'm going to use the brush. And the brush tool I'm going to use, I'm going to bump it down to like a small brush, like 5 is pretty good. Not part of the final drawing this. I'm just using this to close off the gaps. I'm actually going to go behind this and here and here. So if I go to my color layer now and fill it in with white, oh, there's a thing I forgot earlier. Using the bucket tool, there are some things up here, some controls. I got contiguous means connected only, and all layers. Now if I click this here, it's still going to fill in everything, but if I choose all layers, even though I'm on an empty layer with nothing on it, it's going to now pay attention to the line work layer and the gap layer. So boom, boom. Let's hit these highlights in here. Okay, what else can we do here? Well, let's do the teeth. Terrific. There's a color I like to use for mouths that's kind of red but darkened and desaturated. Something like this. And now let's see, how do I color the monkey? Let me think about this. I'm going to draw part of it one color and part of it another color. Think. Let's go sort of a skin tone. I'm thinking like a chimpanzee or whatever. Now, as you can see, I did some areas that I don't really want that color on. Not only that, but my gap, notice that was filled in also, so I'm going to fill those in. Remember that your gap layer, even though you need it to like close off some gaps in your colors and your lines, you eventually need to fill in where those lines are. Now, clearly he's the wrong color in a lot of places, so I'm going to go back to my gap layer. In fact, I'm going to move the gap layer up, get the brush, get that red again. The user I'm using red or pink or something like that is I want to be able to see the stuff I'm doing. So now back to my color layer. I'm going to give my chimpanzee some. Now, we think of him as black hair perhaps, but we're going to use a little bit gray because black is so dominant and so dark. Oh, look, I need to go back here. And that ear is going to fill in if I'm not careful. So I'm going to try to get that gap closed up first. Get his haircut going on. Okay, back to the color layer. Back to gray. There we go. Okay, now if I close the gap, that seems to have worked reasonably well. Let's hide that. Let's zoom out and take a look. Okay, so I still could color in his neck. I think you sort of get the idea, but let's try one more thing. Let's go to my layers panel, and above my color layer, I'm going to add another layer called highlights. Oops, that didn't happen. Double click there. I'm going to call this highlight layer. So I have another layer here, and the purpose of this is so I can add highlights and shadows without necessarily ruining my picture, just in case I make a mistake. So I've already colored stuff in, excepting the neck. Let's just deal with this and move on. I get the brush tool. I'm going to get a nice soft edge brush. 0% hardness means it's going to be feathery on the edge or soft. Let's try these sizes out. And on this new layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the magic wand tool. You may remember this. Where is it? That's not it. There it is, magic wand. So if I click on this, oops, let's choose sample all layers. No, really, there we go. So my purpose there is, so if I use the brush tool, and again, what layer am I on? I'm on the highlight layer, not on the color layer, not on the gap layer, not on the line layer. And what I'm doing here is I'm going like, ooh, that's too dark. Let's reduce the opacity of my brush. And I'm just trying to create a sense of shadow. And it's still pretty dark. Just softly. And I can do the same thing with white. Although that brush is too big for what I want to do. Let's knock this down. Seems like it's not working because white is a lot harder to make it show up. But I'm still getting some highlights and some shadows. And should we do the same thing with his hair? It's a good idea because this is where we're going to get some form out of it. Oops. I deselected. There we go. So I'm actually going to knock the size of the brush down a bit more because with hair, I'm not going to draw each individual hair, but I'm going to give him some highlights. And let's go back to black again or something like it. And there you have it. We now have a chimpanzee character with highlights and shadows. And if I want to go import this into my serial box later on, I'm going to kill the matte layer. And I can import this into my Adobe Illustrator document, which we'll show you some other time. Thanks for watching. Peace.